So nice to be here with you all. Hi, Fran.
Hi, Theo.
My name is Theo Rigby, and I'm the founder of iNation Media. And what I do is create stories, mainly documentary films, that really show many different aspects and kind of put a human face on the immigrant community in the United States. And I work mainly with undocumented communities. So for about 15 years now, I've been trying to kind of, I always say, no one comes home after like a long week at work and kind of snuggles up with their partner Friday night and says like, oh, honey, like I really want to watch an immigration movie right now. That's just exactly what I want to do. People want to watch films that relate to them, right? We're interested in kind of seeing ourselves reflected and learning new things. And people want to watch films about, family and about faith and about sports and about so many different things. So I try to create different entry points into the conversation around immigration, and not make immigration films, but just make films about people that happen to be immigrants. And that's just one part of who they are and their identity. So this brings us to Waking Dream. Waking Dream is a 6-part series. They're short documentaries. They're short episodes. Each episode is about 9 minutes, 8 minutes long. And it really just follows 6 young undocumented people who have DACA permits over the previous 2 years. So these young undocumented people with DACA permits, or are often referred to as dreamers, are kind of an entry point into their communities, into their families, which are almost always mixed status families, and is kind of a perspective into what life is like in our current situation, living in this tenuous scenario. So what I wanted to do is just watch one episode of the series. It's about 9 minutes long. This is the 3rd episode, and just a little primer on it. You'll see it opens with Dylan, who's one of the participants in the series, going back to Mexico to visit his father for the first time in about, his father was deported when he was 9 years old. So it's about 13, 14 years since he's seen his father. And he's able to go back because the current president, if you had a DACA permit, you could apply for something called advanced parole, and if you were accepted, you would be able to travel to one country for a specific amount of time. Now that time has passed. If you have DACA, you cannot leave the country unless you want to stay where you're going and not be allowed back in the country. So let's watch this episode number 3, and then we'll meet Fran and talk about the resources, dialogue guide, lesson plans, and kind of how this series and the associated resources can be potentially used in the classroom. Okay, so at the end of that, at the end of the episode, you saw there was a little a snippet of Steve, who was walking in Washington. There are actually another 2 participants in the series who you didn't meet in that episode. Marisol, who lives close to the border in Arizona, and Steve, who is a Peruvian Chinese, born in Peru to Chinese immigrant parents, came to the U.S. when he was young, and actually his parents were deported to China, and his sister kind of self-deported to Italy, and now he's left here by himself. And Steve talks a lot about kind of the intersectionality and identity not being kind of a monolith within the immigrant community, and talks about how working towards immigrant rights, you can't just work towards immigrant rights, but you need to be intersectional about the way you approach things, and work for racial justice as well as immigrant justice, as well as LGBTQ justice, etc. So I wanted to, we don't have too much time here, I wanted to dig into the resources that we have created for Waking Dream. Right now we're running an impact campaign and really, just really outreach and engagement, trying to connect the series to as many people who will really use it in their communities, in their congregations, in their families, and absolutely in the classroom. We see classrooms as being really the kind of a primary opportunity for Waking Dream to be used in kind of a sustainable, repetitive way. And when we, went into the project knowing that, we knew that we'd need an amazing curriculum designer to join the team, and that's when we paired up with Fran and Blue Shift. So wanted to turn it over to Fran now to walk us through some of the resources as well as the lesson plan that's kind of associated with the episode we just saw.
Great. Thank you, Theo. It's really nice to meet all of you. You hear me okay? Theo, put your thumb up. Is that good?
Great. Yep.
My volume good? Great. I'd like to just do, in the time that we have, sort of a background a bit for you to all understand the structure of the materials that we have and how you can integrate them or incorporate them into your school. So as Theo mentioned, there's 6 episodes, and what's really quite unique about this documentary project is that these episodes are really accessible and classroom friendly in the sense of their length. You just saw one of them right there, very easily to bring into your classroom from middle school up through high school. They can be used individually if you want to be looking at a particular topic, but recommended that you use the whole sequence of the 6 stories because they build upon one another and they really do offer an insight. And I'm reading the chat that everybody says. I think one thing that was already brought to the chat was that these are people from different parts of the immigration story. So there's, from Mexico, we met Dylan, there's Rosie, and others. And so it's not a monolith, it's an international way of looking at immigration. So it's not to sort of pigeonhole what this story is about. By approaching this project, we looked at 3 different materials that we wanted to build. One is a dialogue guide, as is up on the screen right now. Dialogue, I want to underscore and dig into that just for a moment. We chose the word dialogue versus discussion or engagement or debate very intentionally. We see dialogue as a very important framing for classroom conversations around immigration. It's not about proving a right or wrong. It's not necessarily about making sure that your point is heard. But with Waking Dream, as you saw in that one episode, it's about understanding the stories of everyday lives of people, the struggles that they go through, and their hopes and dreams. And in episode 3, you saw really a really nice insight into the backstory of each of those characters and their parents, which you often don't hear about. You hear the story of the individual, the backstory, and what brought them here and their whole experience as a family, mixed status, undocumented. The breadth of that is really important for students to understand. And so by dialogue, we frame this as an idea of what we really want people to do is really focus on building understanding and not necessarily a polarizing or polemical idea here. So that's first and foremost, it's about a conversation. It's about using these stories as a springboard for students to have deeper understanding of this experience of these 6 undocumented young people who might look like them, who might, they're their teachers, they're their soldiers, they're people who they see every day. And I think that's a very important insight that you often don't hear. I think another part of the lessons and the dialogue guide is that they're interdisciplinary. So we did focus primarily on English language arts and social studies because we saw that as the natural place for this kind of material to be incorporated. In each lesson, there is sort of the structure is pretty similar so that there's a routine to it. There's an overview of the episode, gives the teachers, the educators a little bit of a snapshot of what the episode's about. There's an essential question in episode 3. I think you can maybe kind of see it. I don't know if you want to advance a slide there. Theo, is about the American dream. You see the lessons. So there's the nice table of contents for the curriculum here, where you see each lesson. We looked at episode 3, the original Dreamers. This is sort of the overview of the curriculum with the introduction to the series and Theo, and then you can go right to episode 3 with the essential question: what is the American dream, and how does the uncertainty around DACA affect the storyteller's idea of the American dream? We see each of these characters not as subjects, but as storytellers. They're telling their story to our students in each of our classrooms. And through that storytelling, and I know that was brought up in the previous session, it is developing empathy, it's developing understanding, but it's also developing a connection. Students have a reference point for understanding that this is this person. And I can speak from a very personal standpoint, and at my kids' school, they use this in their middle school classroom in their immigration unit. And students did projects based on the stories, and they used Dylan, they used Rosie, they used John and James, and that was their springboard to understand, all right, this is what a soldier, if somebody wants to serve in the military, this is what their experience is. So from essential questions, there's a preview, and then we also have what's called a note catcher with each of the lessons, where so students are actively looking at these episodes. I'm very committed to media literacy and documentary media in that way, meaning that students aren't just watching, they're understanding, they're deciphering, they're even interrogating the media, the point of view, camera, anything from creating the film to understanding what is the point of view that's being expressed both by the filmmaker and the people in the film. So the note catcher allows students to actively look at these materials both as film, but also as content. And so they're learning content as well as storytelling techniques. And then in each lesson, you see that they have open reflection, the watching, there's a direct link to the episode. And then there's post-viewing thing, given that Rosie is a poet, and you learn that in the other episodes. We focused a little bit on poetry here and her idea of the American dream. And we have students engaging in that kind of exercise as a self-expression, as a way for them to understand her experience. Another important part of each of the lessons is what we call debunking myths. And we have, this was also a real big priority, is pulling out of each episode a myth that might be often assumed, but not necessarily challenged. So we have data, and each or data point, a primary source that's a debunking the myth, so that students, we offer the myth, but then we asking them to look at the data. How does that challenge that notion of the myth? And so that there is both this whole process. So they move an arc of sorts from story to personal reflection to connection to looking at that story as a point of contact and as a point of information, and then as a point of debunking the myth. I think, make sure I have everything else that I wanted to cover. I think I'll pause at this point, Theo, and see if there's anything that I've overlooked in the curriculum. And knowing, first of all, oh, thank you. There's the assessment in each of the lessons. There's actually in this, because these are short episodes, we have a cumulative assessment, what we call a Socratic seminar. So each of the episodes that students are collecting their information from their note catchers culminates in a Socratic seminar, which, as educators many know, we did this a little differently, that students are held responsible for each of the episodes and they can use their notes. The text that normally is the foundation for a Socratic seminar is actually the film. And that's a really, I think, another unique aspect is film as text, film as story. And students to start to see that media and educators starting to use media as text, and that's a very important part of this. And so they're really integrating that whole process by students sharing then what notes they took, what quotes they use, and in the lessons you can't see in this lesson, but we have quotes from each of the segments that really are the standout moments, the ahas, when Rosie and her mother are speaking about, we did this together, what is the American dream, John and James's father talking about their dream is my dream. Those sorts of things are like the ahas, where students are like, oh, yes, I really need to talk about that. So we have those pulled out as well. You see there's the rubric, and then there's the English language 6-word memoir that I was talking about in terms of the poetry and the writing. Alongside, just before I pause for questions, alongside the curriculum, we do have a guide, a screening guide, and an event planning that's part of the curriculum. So I'm going to pause there, ask Theo to jump back in and see if there's any questions.
So I just wanted both of you, so we have such a range of educators at all different teaching levels. So could you just talk a little bit about who exactly this is directed to and how it could possibly be adapted or replicated or used by early childhood or maybe adult learners?
Okay. Theo, do you want me to answer that or do you want to start?
I can maybe open it off in that we've really seen a huge range of educators and community groups and people use Waking Dream in different ways. So, you know, we just dug into this very specific lesson plan that's associated with one episode, but for a classroom environment. But we've also seen social workers and educators as well kind of use this sometimes even in a one-on-one basis. You know, for example, Dylan, who you saw go to Mexico, he's actually a middle school teacher. So you see him teaching his middle school class in a predominantly immigrant, high percentage of undocumented family community. And, you know, after, at one point in class, you know, not in the movie, but last year at one point in class, you know, 2 of his students actually shared with him that their fathers were both deported very recently. And, you know, he showed them some episodes of the film and used it as really like a piece of media and an experience to really show them that they're not alone, that he went through the exact same thing, and that there, unfortunately, are hundreds of thousands of people who are going through the exact same thing. So we just wanted to say that, you know, we're talking about using this in like a concerted kind of classroom environment, and the lesson plans were, you know, developed for 6th to 12th grade, but we've also seen communities show it to, you know, 200 people and have a panel of people from most impacted communities there to speak. Or I showed it at a conference of Latino social workers and social workers who are working with a variety of people every day and trying to figure out how to incorporate the short episodes into their work. So just a little bit of like a broad strokes there. That the series is modular, so it can be seen as a 52-minute piece or broken down into these 9-minute episodes, and it can be used in kind of like a very flexible way. So Fran,
thank you. I would only add that the dialogue guide was geared more towards you know, higher ed and adult community audiences, and it mirrors a lot of what the lessons have. The lessons are very much standard aligned lessons. I see the question. It is all free, downloadable on the website, so there's no cost to using this, which is, you know, golden for every teacher out there. I get that. But the lessons were standard aligned for 6 through 12 social studies and ELA, using mostly using Common Core and some McCrell standards in that sort of way. But for higher ed or for younger audiences, I think it's very easily adaptable. Those questions, the essential question, the episode itself, because it's short, can be great K-5, as long as it's and we didn't really even talk about this, but I see a lot of people talking about how do you make sure it's safe. There is assumptions going on that if you bring this kind of content into your classroom, you have prepared your classroom. It's a safe classroom to have conversations around immigration. There's trusting relationships. If you need to do parent communication, you know, I trust educators to understand who their students are and when to bring in the content that's appropriate. So there is preparation to bring this in. You don't do this the first week of school, right? This takes some care to get into this. You've done context building, you've done historical understanding, or you've read literature that talks about what this is, the sensitivity of this. So you don't just go into this as, you know, just fresh in that way. That there's a building around that, which I trust most teachers would do, certainly around immigration units and DACA. So I think that if you could use the dialogue guide for the adult audiences or in higher ed and rely on the lessons for the 6-12, I think you're in good shape that way.
And are there any plans to have the videos translated into different languages? We have teachers who teach, you know, multilingual classrooms.
Yeah, so the the links you have here, basically the public facing series is on YouTube. It's on kind of a PBS, a YouTube channel under the PBS umbrella. And we did translate it into Spanish, so there are Spanish captions for the English spoken parts of the series on YouTube. And then, unfortunately, we don't have it, just like a bandwidth element that we don't have it translated into other languages. We'd love to have it translated into other languages. If people have suggestions of how to do that, definitely very, very open. But right now, it's bilingual Spanish and English.